Hey, what's up, Solutioneers? Welcome back to the vlog. Today we're going to talk about Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR, which is a policy tool that makes consumer brands responsible for the environmental impacts of their products and packaging. Specifically, we're going to get into how we seem to have reached a tipping point to get packaging EPR passed throughout the United States, and also how we can ensure that it becomes a tool to achieve a circular economy for packaging that follows the waste reduction hierarchy of reduce and reuse first before recycling. Now, EPR as an idea began in the 1980s when a Swedish economist named Thomas Lindquist wrote a groundbreaking paper suggesting that a producer's responsibility for the environmental impacts of their products and packaging extended past the point of sale and consumption or use. Essentially, if you make it, you need to take it back. This groundbreaking idea caught fire in Europe during the 1990s, and here in the United States, Upstream was the first national organization to advocate for mandatory EPR policy across the country in the early 2000s. And we helped establish and support a movement that has now passed more than 100 EPR laws in nearly 40 different states, making companies responsible for the collection and recycling of computers and television sets, cell phones, mercury-containing thermostats, light bulbs, batteries, paint, pesticides, carpet, mattresses, unused pharmaceuticals, and now packaging. In 2011, we helped initiate and work to develop and pass EPR for packaging legislation in the U.S., and over the next 4 years, we facilitated stakeholder dialogues between the solid waste and recycling industry, local governments, brands, packaging suppliers, and retailers. We developed multiple models of legislation and worked with our partners across the country to introduce packaging EPR into half a dozen states. We got close in a couple, but ultimately we failed. Several of the brands that had previously supported EPR pulled out their support after leadership changes, and the momentum stalled. In 2016, China was still taking our low-value recyclables, and cities could make a little bit of money or at least break even by collecting even some of the lowest value plastics. While they would have been happy to take money from brands under EPR, local governments didn't want to lose control of their operations, and the big players in the solid waste and recycling industries didn't want their business models changed. Perhaps most of all, consumer brands and their associations, which were leading the opposition, they really didn't feel like they had to do anything. A little sprinkling of money here and there on some recycling initiatives for good PR seemed to be enough to keep the regulators at bay. But that started to change in 2015. And as the wheels were coming off the EPR for packaging bus for us, so to speak, we started to work more closely with organizations like our friends at the Five Gyres Institute and Algalita and the Plastic Pollution Coalition, who were drawing attention to an emerging environmental crisis that we now call plastic pollution. With our realization that plastic pollution was the poster child for why we needed corporate accountability for packaging waste, we pivoted our work to support the development of the Break Free from Plastic movement, which is a global movement of more than 2,000 organizations working together to solve plastic pollution. One of the most impactful strategies that BFFP developed was to turn beach cleanups, which up until that point had solely focused on counting and identifying the types of plastic products found in the environment, into brand audits, which would also identify and track the brands associated with all the plastic products collected. We now had a tool to show which brands were the biggest plastic polluters in the world, and not surprisingly, everywhere we looked, from Southeast Asia to Africa to the US and Europe, the same brands kept showing up. Coca-Cola, Nestle, Unilever, PepsiCo, P&G. What had previously been under the radar was now a full-blown PR crisis for these companies. Now, something else important was brewing as well. In the spring of 2017, China announced their national sword policy, which was building off a previous policy called the Green Fence, and they began to inspect and halt shipments of low-value mixed plastics, mixed recyclables. Up until that point, China had been accepting more than half of the world's recyclable materials. But suddenly, bales of mixed plastics, which governments could unload for a small profit, became a massive cost. As one city councilor told me, when I started, we could sell mixed plastic bales for $10 a ton, and now it costs me $140 to recycle them and only $80 to landfill them. You do the math. And of course, local governments across the U.S. did the math. And some decided it was still worth it to try and recycle the low-value plastics, while others shut down their recycling operations as soon as the math didn't add up. With the economics and benefits of recycling under scrutiny and pressure on brands from the bad PR around plastic pollution, a big opportunity has opened up to develop and pass public policy around packaging waste. But unfortunately, as the EPR debate has resurfaced, it's been missing a huge opportunity to focus further upstream on source reduction and reuse and building better and more circular systems rather than just on who pays for recycling. Now, getting to our recommendations at Upstream, first, EPR for packaging is a foundational policy for a circular economy, and we need to get it firmly established here in the US. But as I mentioned at the start, the devil's in the details. There's good EPR and bad EPR, and much of that has to do with how it's structured, who's involved in the decision making, what the measurements of success are, and how it's enforced. Secondly, EPR is not a panacea, and it's not the ceiling, it's the floor. With the rhetoric from certain brands around EPR, you would either think it's the pinnacle of progress or the most onerous regulation imaginable. The bottom line is that EPR is a starting point. But to get to a truly circular economy that prioritizes the reduction of the resources we take from the planet while also growing a decent standard of living for people around the world, we're going to need a lot more. Now, we've developed the policy ladder to the circular economy as well as our reuse policy playbook, which you can find at upstreamsolutions.org. Now, these resources show how EPR fits into a series of policies that can help us get there. Third, EPR shouldn't just be about who pays for recycling and how to optimize it. The impacts of packaging waste are about more than whether packaging ends up in a landfill or a recycling facility or as litter. The upstream impacts of relying on one-way throwaway packaging can be greatly minimized by developing new reuse refill systems for delivering the same products to consumers. Similarly, reducing unnecessary packaging where practical can have a huge impact on the overall environmental footprint of product delivery. And lastly, a recycling-only focus doesn't prevent litter or mitigate the packaging that winds up in the environment. So for our final and most important recommendation, EPR must also include source reduction and reuse and refill targets. Remember that the first two R's, reduce and reuse, are way more important for the environment than recycling. And critical studies on recycling have yet to demonstrate a significant impact in reducing stress on the natural world from commerce. But getting people what they want and need without generating any waste in the first place always wins over recycling and single use. Just like 30 years ago, when we didn't have much recycling infrastructure, we're in a similar point with reuse infrastructure. Then as now, it's going to take public policy and public and private investment to build this new infrastructure to transform how we get and use our products. Now, these reuse refill targets work like fuel efficiency standards for cars, which apply to each individual automaker and have them meet a miles per gallon standard across all the cars they sell each year. Similarly, refill targets would apply to each individual company, and they would have to sell a certain percentage of their products in reusable packaging by a certain date, starting small and then adjusting higher over time. You could also do this by sector, focusing on food service, beverage, consumer packaged goods, and e-commerce, really focusing on consumable goods. Now, last year I made the prediction that 2021 was going to be the year that EPR for packaging moved forward in the United States. And thanks to the efforts of great organizers like my friend Sarah Lakeman at the Natural Resources Council of Maine, packaging EPR legislation passed in both Maine and Oregon. This year, I expect 3 or 4 more states to follow, and within 5 years, a majority of the country. In closing, if there's one thing we want you to remember, it's that EPR shouldn't just be about who pays for recycling. Fundamentally, it should be a policy tool to achieve a circular economy for packaging that follows the waste reduction hierarchy of reduce and reuse first before recycling. It won't be easy, but the results are going to be worth it, so let's get it done. We hope you like what you're seeing on the blog, and please remember to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. Let us know what you'd like for us to cover throughout the year with the vlog. Thanks again for tuning in.